Game keycards have been the one true sour points of the Switch 2, I think, for a lot of people, even more than the price of the console, Mario Kart World being $80. Game keycards have left a very bad impression of the entire console for physical collectors especially. And I get the frustration as someone who loves collecting physical media. This entire channel was made as a spin-off of my main channel, Botox Games, as a way to talk about game collecting and the games I'm playing, so I'm right there with you. I understand that game keycards are without a doubt just worse than a regular physical release. However, the amount of misinformation I have seen regarding game keycards on Switch 2 is completely out of control. Every day, I see new posts claiming that you need to be connected to the internet at all times to play these games. I see people saying that these are just as bad as the code in box releases you see from time to time, and that these are a waste of plastic. At this point, you might as well just buy a digital copy. I get not being happy with the direction physical media is going, but I do think that the widespread misinformation about game keycards has made the entire internet's outrage regarding them completely overblown. Are they worse than a standard physical release that you would normally see on the Nintendo Switch? Yes, absolutely. Are they as bad as people are saying, though? I don't even really think it's close to that bad or that big of a deal. People are acting like this is the worst thing that has ever happened. This is the worst thing that Nintendo has ever done. So today I wanted to talk about game keycards and why I, as a physical media collector, don't have that big of an issue with them. Of course, if you are new here and you enjoy video game collecting, Nintendo collecting, PlayStation as well, I would appreciate you liking the video and subscribing. Let's get into it. Okay, so first things first, what is a game keycard? A game keycard is a physical Switch 2 cartridge that you can buy at retail in a Nintendo Switch 2 box, but it has none of the game's data on it, meaning that, for instance, if you bought Street Fighter 6 on Nintendo Switch 2, you will need to download the entire game to your console. This is a huge bummer. A major component of physical media is not having to download the game, not having to connect to the internet. And in most cases, especially on the Nintendo Switch, so far, you don't need to be connected to the internet at all to play a game. Most Switch games really don't even have updates. A lot of Switch games don't even have patches, especially when we're talking about first-party games from Nintendo. I say most cases, though, because this idea isn't entirely new. We'll talk about PlayStation and Xbox in a second, but even on the Switch 1, there are games that require a download even with the physical cartridge, and it's not just random games that people don't care about. It's real, actual games that people are interested in. I went to my shelf and I just pulled a couple to see because I had a suspicion based on the publisher that they would require a download. Here's one, Grand Theft Auto, the trilogy. You can see right there, download required. Or how about Monster Hunter Stories 2, Wings of Ruin? Download required. The Metal Gear Solid Collection, Borderlands 3 on Switch, Life is Strange True Colors. There are several instances of Switch 1 games that do require a download even with the cartridge, so this entire thing is not new, and the number of games that require a download only expands when you look at PlayStation and Xbox. For me, having to download the game or most of the game's data isn't a deal breaker. What's more annoying to me and the bigger issue in terms of having to download them, for me personally, is that they'll now take up space on your internal storage or on your SD card. Now, storage space has been an issue on Xbox and PlayStation since the launch of the 8th generation consoles, where even if you had a disc and all of the data is on that disc, an install to your hard drive is still required. But with the Nintendo Switch, most physical games can be played right off the game card without taking up any storage. This is a major shift and a hard pill to swallow as game sizes are getting bigger and bigger. Split Fiction is a whopping 73 gigs on Switch 2. Madden 26 is 62 gigs. The Nintendo Switch 2 only comes with 256 gigs of internal storage, so you're going to fill it up very, very quickly. And even when you do buy these new game key cards, you're still going to need to be mindful of what games you actually have installed at any given moment. Now, for the most part, this wasn't an issue on the Switch 1, so game keycards and the prevalence of them is a bigger issue than it was on Switch 1 with those games I highlighted, and more, of course, than what I showed. But it was still a thing on Switch 1, just not as widespread and as prevalent as the game keycards so far seem to be. So for me, as a physical media collector, that is the biggest issue I have with game keycards. Not that I have to download them or be connected to the internet, but really that they're going to take up a bunch of storage storage space on my SD card on my internal Switch 2 storage. However, one of the most prominent talking points I keep seeing regarding these game keycards is that they are a scam because Nintendo can shut down the eShop and its servers at any point that they want to, which would render the game keycard unusable and worthless. It would become just a waste of plastic. And yes, it is true. Nintendo could do that. They could shut down the eShop on Switch 2. They could shut down the servers. However, you have absolutely zero reason to think that will ever happen. There seems to be a widespread confusion about how Nintendo has operated in the past, but really this does apply to all three companies. Yes, Nintendo has shut down the Wii Shop channel, the 3DS eShop, and the Wii U eShop. Xbox has shut down the Xbox 360 store. PlayStation tried to shut down the PS3 and Vita store a couple of years ago before going back on that decision due to fan backlash. Good on them. But I have seen hundreds of posts over the past month claiming that once Nintendo shuts down the eShop servers on Switch 2, the game keycards will become unusable and you won't be able to download the data from the cartridge anymore. This is simply not true. I don't know if the people complaining just don't actually play games or what, or they've never downloaded a game before and they don't know how it works, but even on Wii, to this day, almost 20 years after the console released, before Nintendo had an account system or anything, you can still re-download the WiiWare and Virtual Console games you bought. Once again, almost 20 years ago. You can still load up the Wii U or 3DS eShop and re-download purchases that you made there 10, 15 years ago. You can still go on the Xbox 360 store and re-download Xbox Live arcade games that you purchased. If in 2025, nearly 20 years after the release of the Wii, Nintendo has still kept the option to re-download Wii games you bought before they had a cohesive account system. You know, this is still when they're tied to your console. Keep that in mind. I think there is absolutely no reason to think there will ever be a point in our lifetimes that Nintendo will shut down the ability to download any data of games you purchased on the Switch 2. Now that they have a cohesive account system, now that they have the Switch as a platform that they will likely continue moving forward with a Switch 3 and a Switch 4, this isn't a guarantee, of course. Nintendo could, in theory, do that, but as it stands, there is just nothing supporting the idea that they will make it so you can't download data for a game keycard, or re-download a Switch 1 game that you bought, or even in 20 years, re-download a Wii game that you bought in 2006. There is no evidence to suggest that any of the three major console manufacturers are planning on doing this in the future. This entire thought process is fear-mongering at best, and downright delusional at its worst. I know that an all-digital future is scary, but we have no legitimate reason to think that this is going to be an issue in our lifetimes. And just to play devil's advocate, if we're really going to worry about things without any legitimate reason to actually be concerned about it, you know what is a way bigger issue and something that is actually starting to happen with certain games? Disc rot. Because disc rot is something that's actually starting to happen to certain games, especially on GameCube and on Xbox 360. That is a much bigger issue than this bogeyman idea that Nintendo's going to shut down the ability to re-download games you purchased on the Switch 2. You have no reason to think that's going to happen. And once again, yes, I totally get that an all-digital future is scary. There will be select cases where a game is removed from the eShop and your ownership gets revoked. We've seen that happen with certain games before. Of course, PT was free, but PT is a major example of a game that you cannot re-download anymore from PSN because it was removed by Konami. There are other examples of it, but in the grand scheme of things, when we're talking about tens of thousands of games existing on these platforms, there's no reason to think that across the board, you will not be able to re-download a Switch 2 game, be it digitally on the eShop or a game keycard. There's no reason to think that in 50 to even 80 years, you won't be able to download that. There is nothing to back that up. There is no evidence to support that idea. If Nintendo is still letting me download Wii games before they even had an account system, why would that change on Switch 2? This is the major sticking point for a lot of people of why game keycards are bad, and I just don't understand because it's just not true. This is not a thing that they do. They've never taken away the ability to re-download games that you purchase digitally. That's never happened. Something else I've seen a lot of is that the game key cards are just as bad as the code and box releases. I actually have one here that I got on sale at Best Buy for like 10 bucks a long time ago for Switch 1. It's Overwatch Legendary Edition, full game download, game card not included. It is literally just a piece of paper, and it had a code on it for Overwatch back in like 2016 or whatever. I've seen so many people saying they are just as bad as those code and box releases, and to that point, I don't think that you understand what the actual issue is. I prefer physical media to buying games digitally as my primary way of buying things because it allows you to share with friends and sell the game later if you decide you don't like it, or if you decide you shouldn't have bought it, whatever the case is. And usually, in most cases, especially when talking about new games, you can find a physical copy for cheaper than you can digitally, especially in that holiday period around Black Friday. You can find a physical new release of a PlayStation, Xbox, or Switch game for cheaper than you can buy it digitally. That is why I prefer physical media. Game key cards still offer all of that. Nothing has changed for me other than the storage space. I can still do all of those things with a game key card. It is not a license that is being tied to your account. I've seen a lot of people say that. You can still sell it. You can give it to a friend. It is not tied to your Nintendo account. It is still acting as a real cartridge that you can trade in and get rid of when you're done with it. Buying digital games, for me, can often feel like tossing money into a void. Once it's done, there's just no going back except for the 2-hour return period on Steam. I truly wish that game keycards weren't a thing and all of these games were getting the proper physical releases with all of the data on the cartridge, but it's nowhere a deal breaker for me, and to compare it to a code and box release is just absurd. Code and box releases I kind of get from like a top level. Like, I can understand why some publishers would do it. It's so that people buying gifts for birthdays and for Christmas can walk into a Target or a Best Buy or a Walmart and see a physical box of Split Fiction or Civilization 7 on the shelf and throw some wrapping paper on it and give it to little Timmy. So logistically, I understand that, but I do think that now, especially with Nintendo offering this whole game keycard thing as an option, the code and boxes are even more dumb than they were before. Nintendo is supposedly having 1 gig cards and 64 gig cards for Switch 2. You're telling me that EA couldn't cough up the money for a 1 gig Switch 2 cartridge for Split Fiction? Game key cards should have been an end to the whole code and box releases ever happening, but it almost feels like there's more than usual right now, which is definitely an issue. Split Fiction is 1, Civilization 7, it looks like Shadow Labyrinth and Tony Hawk might be, but to the people saying that code and box releases are essentially the same thing as a game key card because game key cards are worthless, we need to squash that thought because it's definitely not true. Game keycards require a download. It requires an internet connection to download it, yes, but they aren't tied to your accounts. You can still sell them when you're done or give them to a friend. That is not the same as a download code that is tied to your account forever. Frankly, as a physical collector, this is the big enemy I feel like we should all be uniting to fight. It's the code and box releases, because that is the true death of physical media. As a physical collector, my number one priority isn't just adding cool games to my collection, putting them on the shelf. It's playing them. Above all else, I just like playing video games. Just last month, I bought Oblivion Remastered digitally on PS5 because there is currently no physical option to buy it. If I want a game bad enough, I'm going to buy the game. I'm not going to just go cold turkey and say, oh, I'm not going to play this game I'm excited for because there isn't a proper physical option available. But I've learned through this entire debacle that there are a lot of people in the collecting community that care more about having a cartridge with data on it than actually playing video games. So many posts and people saying that they'll completely skip a game they're excited for if it's digital only or only on a game key card. I'm going to be honest, that is completely nuts to me. That is a foreign idea of not playing a game that you want to play because it's only available on the eShop or only available as a game key card. I'm here to play games. Collecting is a cool side effect of it. I like owning all of this stuff, and it's neat to have the boxes, but like, I'm here to play games. If Yakuza 0 on Switch 2 didn't have a game key card and was truly only available digitally on the eShop, yeah, I'd be really disappointed that it doesn't have a physical option because I prefer a physical option, but I still want to have one of my favorite games of all time on the go. I want to play it again on Switch 2, so I personally would buy it digitally. Game key cards obviously are not ideal, but people acting like they're a waste of plastic or just as bad as the code and box releases, you might as well buy it on the eShop, I just do not understand that. They are a solid, if not a little annoying and frustrating middle ground to a proper physical release, in my opinion. I vastly prefer this to having it be a true digital-only option on the eShop for all of the reasons I said earlier. Sharing it with friends, being able to sell it, getting good deals physically on Black Friday and other sales throughout the year. Those, to me, are the three major pillars of why I buy physical games. I will say, I also feel like Nintendo kind of shot themselves in the foot by being honest about the entire situation. By giving this format and this type of release a name, game key cards, they've given people something to latch onto, a tangible thing to be upset about. Sony and Microsoft have been doing this for years, for most of the PS5 and Xbox Series X generation, but also certain games on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. This has been a thing for a while. And while I won't claim that the same people upset right now about Switch 2 game keycards aren't upset about certain PlayStation and Xbox releases not being fully on the disc, the pure outrage of those two versus the game keycard situation is not even comparable. People are so much more upset about game keycards than I have ever seen for any of these releases on PlayStation and Xbox. You know, it's pretty funny, because PlayStation and Series X games have been much more discreet about requiring downloads. I've seen so many posts from people flabbergasted that a game like Star Wars Outlaws or Hogwarts Legacy are game keycards on Switch 2 because they thought they were on the disc on the other platforms. They thought they didn't require a download. Yeah, no. These games also require download on the other platforms, even on Switch. Hogwarts Legacy requires a download on the Switch version. A good chunk of the games confirmed as game keycards on Switch 2 already required a download on the other versions. Hitman World of Assassination is another one. Tony Hawk Pro Skater requires a download on PS4. I'm not saying that all PlayStation and Xbox games require a download. I don't think it's even most of them, but this is not a new thing on the Switch 2. Nintendo just gave it a name, and like I said, people have latched onto it as the big thing to hate on, I feel like. And once again, I'm not trying to claim people aren't upset about those releases on other platforms, but the vocal outrage regarding Switch 2 game cards versus PS5 and Series X games that require a download, and even those Switch 1 games that we've talked about, it is on a whole other level that we have never seen before in terms of outrage regarding physical media for game consoles. There's also just been a lot of like moral grandstanding surrounding the entire game keycard situation, which I find pretty gross, to be honest. I mentioned pre-ordering some Switch 2 game keycard games in a video that I posted last month, and there were people genuinely telling me to check my morals and that I'm morally bankrupt for buying Switch 2 game keycards. If you want to vote with your wallet and not buy these, that is fine. But to look down and talk this way to other people who ultimately just want to play video games, well, it's just ridiculous. I saw this post from SwitchUp that reads, quote, "Choose real. Let's discuss the only real games Switch 2 is getting." Making a video going over Switch 2 games that are actually all on the cartridge, you know, Cyberpunk, Rune Factory, that is fine, that's a good idea. I will probably end up doing a similar video eventually, but to frame it this way is just so disingenuous to me. So you're saying Street Fighter 6 isn't a real game, Bravely Default, hell, even the actual digital-only games like Deltarune and Fast Fusion, these aren't real games because they are not on a cartridge. This goes back to what I was saying earlier, but even though I am a physical media collector, above all else, I just like to play games, even if that means buying a game keycard or even an eShop only game. I feel like in the past month, I've been teleported to a world where all that matters to people is the data on a cartridge, and that just does not compute to me. I understand being frustrated. I understand choosing to vote with your wallet against these if you feel so strongly about it, but the amount of people talking down on others for how they choose to buy games is, frankly, it's disgusting. It also just feels like a lot of these people, the ones talking down on others specifically, I should specify, have had their eyes closed with their hands over their ears for like the past decade. While it is true that most people on Nintendo Switch buy physical if and when possible, this is not the case for the majority of games across all consoles. The majority of game sales within this industry are digital. And that's not even factoring in Steam, which is digital only, of course. Most PlayStation and Xbox sales are digital at this point. If people want to have a digital library for convenience's sake or for really any other reason, that's fine by me. Like I said, when there's no other option, I will from time to time buy a game on the eShop or on PSN. I just find it weird that game keycards, which allow you to share with a friend or resell it. I find it weird that this is like the tipping point when most people have already been all in on the digital train this entire time. Game keycards is where you're drawing your moral line in the sand. You're going to start saying games that are digital only aren't real games. What are we doing here? Once again, vote with your wallet. I am all for that, but don't like drag other people into it. You can voice your concerns, absolutely, but as we've gone through in this video, most of the concerns that I've seen, specifically regarding being able to download these games 20, 30 years in the future, that's not even a real concern. There is absolutely zero reason to think that's going to be an issue. So vote with your wallet if you must. Only buy games that have all of the data on the cartridge if you must. That is totally fine by me, but don't like talk down on other people for choosing to buy a game they want to play because they're buying it through a game key card, or if they're buying it digitally on the eShop or on Steam or whatever. People just want to play games, and for most gamers, it doesn't even really matter what format they're buying it in. They just want to play a thing. This entire situation is very frustrating because on the one hand, I get it. Game key cards are absolutely, once again, just want to really reiterate this, game key cards are absolutely worse than a regular physical cartridge, which is why in my videos, I've really given applause to a company like Marvelous with Rune Factory and Daemon X Machina and Story of Seasons, or CD Projekt Red with Cyberpunk 2077. All of that data is going to be on the cartridge. So huge shout out to them. They are doing it better than anyone else right now. I guess aside from maybe Nintendo, because Nintendo's games are going to be all on the cartridge, which is also something people still don't seem to understand. But I just feel like the reaction to game key cards has been so overblown in a negative way that doesn't really reflect the reality of the situation. As we've discussed in this video, most of the reasons that I've seen people really upset about it are for reasons that simply aren't true. Be it that you need to have a constant internet connection to download it. Some people think that you can't resell them after you put them in because it's a game key card, so the key is going to your account. No, you can still resell them. You can still loan them to a friend. And the major thing for the game preservationists of, oh, Nintendo's going to shut down the servers and make it so you can't re-download these things, there's no reason to think they're going to do that because they haven't done it for the Wii yet. I know this video is going to get a lot of hate because people are so against game key cards, and that's fine. I totally get it, but I feel like as a physical collector and as someone who I do every once in a while see a post, you know, kind of on my side of the situation being like, what is going on here? I wanted to talk about this because this is a collecting channel, and you better believe I'm going to collect Switch 2 games, and I'm going to buy Switch 2 games, and I'm going to do videos on a Yakuza 0 game key card. I'm going to cover a Rune Factory, even though these are two separate types of physical releases. I'm still going to cover them. But let me know in the comments down below, how do you feel about game key cards? Are you more on my side of things and thinking that they're not really that big of a deal? Or are you someone who is totally against them? I would love to get a hopefully friendly conversation going down below. Follow me on Twitter at BoTalksGames. Check out my other Nintendo news channel at BoTalksGames as well. And you can click on one of these two videos to listen to me ramble about even more Nintendo collecting stuff. Until next time, folks. Peace.